Everybody knows how much it sucks to use one-time codes, push notifications. Not only is it a bad user experience, but it's incredibly easy to compromise. And Beyond Identity is just magic. You swipe your fingerprint, and then you're logged in.
We actually have the experts who are here helping us with all the projects that we take on.
What differentiates Beyond Identity's solution is our unique architecture that binds every user to its device. Using this with our risk signals and policy engine, we can make continuous decisions on who gets access and to what.
Beyond Identity takes a radically different approach to building identity products, and that has ramifications across our entire platform, from the admin experience, the user experience, to what's actually happening on the back end. And this is not something you can just hand wave and fake. And for us, it's actually really fundamental to every line of code that we write.
All right, well, that's exciting. Let me turn it over to our co-founder and CEO, Jason, for our first talk.
Morning. Let me see if I remember all the instructions I was given yesterday. I'm going to put my hot tea over here so I don't spill it. So I just wanted to start with, we know this is a lot for everyone to take a full day, possibly even 2 days out of their schedule for all of you that traveled and came in. You have a work, you have a life, you have a family. This is not insignificant. Thank you for making the time to come here. We do appreciate your participation. We have this big schedule where we're up here spending a lot of our time talking, but don't let that confuse you. This is really about us trying to listen and understand about your problems and your concerns and your goals for the next 12, 24, 36 months in the land of identity. So if we're not saying something and you think we're missing, speak up. If we are saying something and it's not landing, tell us. If we are talking through something and it is landing, but we may not know it, right? Because it may actually be something new and we're still testing out ideas. So feedback is what we live for. And that's really the big point of this whole conference, is to share a bit about where we think we're going and kind of get a response and understand, is this in line with the problems that you actually care about? Are we actually helping you solve business problems that matter? So again, thanks for coming. Please don't be shy. While there's a lot of engineers, they will listen. They just will stare at your shoes. But you know, you've heard these jokes all before. We got a great lineup today. And I wanted to start with an interesting story and background. So 5 years ago in July, I left my previous job. I was a CTO of a company called Security Scorecard. I ran engineering and product management there. And for those of you who don't know, it's a cybersecurity risk rating. So you all have credit scores, your business have credit scores. Security Scorecard is essentially a version of that, but for cyber health. And most of you already know this because you probably get reports. And I spent 3 years there, had a great time. And I left the business in July thinking I'm going to start something around cybersecurity intelligence. And one of the learnings I had at Scorecard actually came from working with cyber insurers. And we spent a lot of time working with cyber insurers and their actual losses through actually having to pay out claims. And obviously we were trying to run the math of, hey, here are the million things that we track and the metrics that we give to our board and whatnot. Which of them are actually significant? Like which metrics actually matter? Which metrics really correlate to breach, or from an insurance company, payout? And through this big process, obviously a multi-year process, getting access to all this data from the insurers, we kind of realized that there really are 4 points that have high statistical correlations to bad outcomes. And those 4 points were, do you use a password manager? Do you use multi-factor? Do you have a patch management program? And how are you not over-privileging authorization and access? And then there was almost a million other metrics that everyone tracks and reports on, and their correlation was like it was not measurable. And so I was thinking about like some sort of analytics company around that, and I'd taken a break. I hadn't really taken a break in 3 or 4 years, so I was sailing around, but in a tiny sailboat, and I got an email from someone purporting to be working for Jim Clark. And so for those of you who don't know, Jim Clark started a very famous company out of his PhD called Silicon Graphics. If that name doesn't mean anything to you, how about Jurassic Park, right? Jurassic Park was made on Silicon Graphics. A bunch of other stuff was too. He started a company called Netscape, right? Netscape helped usher the world onto the internet. And we may have a little bit more on that later today, but I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. And he started what turned into something you know as WebMD, Shutterfly. So like the list goes on. Very, very prolific person. If it's actually interesting, I highly, highly suggest you read a book called The New Thing by Michael Lewis, the guy who wrote Moneyball. Anyway, I read that book back in 2000 or whenever that book first came out. So I knew exactly who Jim Clark was. I'm getting this email. This is 2019. It's like, hey, I work for Jim and he wants to talk to you. And I'm like, spam. Like, Jim's got to be what, 70 something? He's a billionaire. He's famous for having like the world's largest yachts and then programming them so he can drive them around through a satellite link. Like, this is not really him. No, Jim doesn't want to talk to me. And I got a couple more emails. Same thing. Hey, no, this is Jim. I'm working with Jim and his partner TJ, and they have these 2 founding engineers, and they have this really idea, and they like your profile, and they want to meet. So long story short, I finally replied. And lo and behold, it was actually Jim. And so, you know, you're thinking like, what's this going to be like, right? He's 70 something years old. He's a billionaire. His concerns and what he wants for the rest of his life are clearly going to be different, right, than the things that I'm interested in. And what he did was, well, first of all, he's a tinkerer, right? He doesn't stop. He just wants to write code and build things. And he had this home automation company called Commandscape. And out of this home automation company, there was this aha moment by one of the engineers there. And Nelson, why don't you stand up so everybody knows who you are? So Nelson had a Steve Jobs moment where he realized, so remember everybody, Steve Jobs, when Steve Jobs was trying to explain the iPod. The iPod is great. How do you explain it? Don't give me all this technical mumbo jumbo. Just tell me, like, what does it mean? How does it make you feel? And it's like 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? And now that's meaningless to us. But at the time, right, it's like, ooh, I got a Discman, right? Or it was just a different time. And Nelson was like, well, wait a minute. Everyone now has an HSM in their pocket. So maybe a little nerdy, a little technical, but he was onto something, right? Like on your mobile device, on your laptop, is something very, very similar to a hardware security module, something that lets you basically do authentication in a way easy and secure. And being swapped out mics. It's like a tennis racket. I must have just broken a string. All right, it's great to have a coach. And so Jim and Nelson, and there's the other co-founder is running around here somewhere, Mike Clark. You can't miss him. He's even taller than I am. Basically pitched me on this idea. Is like, hey, we think the world could log into work and their customers could log in and consume stuff without having to worry about a password. It'd be super simple and easy. And in my brain, I was thinking, ooh, the 4 most likely causes of bad things from a cybersecurity incident perspective. If you're doing authentication that doesn't require a password, if you're on the device that someone's working from, if it's truly multi-factor, well, you solve the password manager problem. Just get rid of the password, right? Use a signature, not a secret. Number 2, right? You can inherently do MFA, right? Just do a biometric, do a local PIN. There's all sorts of 2nd and 3rd and 4th factors. Number 3, patch management. I'm on that device. What better time is there than to ask the question, are you secure enough for the environment you're asking to be allowed into, right? And then finally, privilege. Well, if you're doing those first things, right, it's like a natural progression from authentication is then into authorization. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that was 5 years ago this summer. And Strange coincidence, 5 years ago this week, Jim said, let's make this go. He wrote a check. He said, go get an office. We actually got our first office. We came together and started working as a company. I mean, you guys had stuff going for a bit, but it was in Jim's, foyer or map room? So yeah, it's crazy. 5 years ago to this day, we kind of all got it kicked off. And yeah, it's been a crazy journey. So anyway, a little bit about the background, and let's get moving. So identity is, I'm being given something else. All right, it's great to have people. Every business, everything in your business at some point depends on identity, right? You need to track your customers. How do you know what they bought? How do you know what to refund? How do you know it's them and not fraud? Every business has workers. You have employees, you have contractors, you have business partners. They need to help you, right? They're not going to help you with just phone calls. They're going to need access to your data. They're going to need access to your services. You probably need to track who is who. You probably need to understand what they're trying to do, right? And so there's the how do I enable the business part? There's how do I prevent bad things? And then, sometimes bad things do happen. So how do I respond? How do I triage? And when we got started, one of the fundamental premises of this business was this realization that in the modern business, identity is really that road to the island, right? And it doesn't matter who you are. You have to cross that road to get to anything of value, whether it's data or a service. You have to go through the authentication and authorization system, plain and simple, right? Maybe it's distributed and you could, do a better job consolidating your IDP stacks and whatnot, but that's not the point. The point is everything goes through identity. Identity is the bridge. So if identity is the bridge, holy smokes, it's almost like a high vantage point to really do interesting things. If everyone, regardless of whether it's employee, contractor, business partner, has to cross this bridge, I now have a control point where I can actually understand, well, what's going on? Is their device compliant? Is their device going to cause me a problem? This CVE that I read about yesterday that's like a CVE score of 9, like, are they bringing that to bear by accessing my environment? Maybe it's compliance, right? How do I prove to my auditor without wasting 3 people's time for a week to produce evidence that I have effective controls on everyone who accesses my customers' data, whether I manage their devices or not? Again, starts with identity. So, the problem existed, but COVID laid it bare and made everyone care about it, right? And when I say the problem, most security architectures, actually, I'll argue all security architectures are perimeter and moat-based architectures. And you're like, no, we're moving away from that. Zero trust, zero trust. I'm going to argue even zero trust is still a moat-based mentality. We're just talking about the size of the moat, right? Historic network architectures, right? My perimeter defense is a perimeter around a private network. And it's like a party, right? Like it's a trusted environment on the inside. I assume that if you're on the inside, you are 21 and we can serve you so the bartenders don't have to worry, right? Implicit trust, right? That doesn't do so well in security, right? And with this movement with zero trust, we're not really getting rid of the perimeter. What we're doing is we're actually shrinking it. Rather than build a perimeter around a network, what if we built a perimeter around an identity itself? What if we built a perimeter around a transaction? And what if we were actually asking, who are you? What do you want? Are you safe to allow that operation to go forward at the transaction level? And if you solve it at the transaction level, everything else just builds on top. And it's kind of like a different world. So it's still a perimeter, but it's like a microscopic perimeter. It's like, hey, you know what? There are these things called atoms. And you know what? If you break the atoms apart, there's something inside of there. It's nucleons. And if you break one of those open, there's some more stuff on the inside. And you get my idea. So COVID laid this bare, right? COVID basically said the world's shutting down and all of the controls that you've built around these perimeters aren't going to work because you can't go into work, right? So you had this nomadic workforce. You had this hybrid workforce. Businesses soared, at least a lot of tech businesses soared during COVID to enable this hybrid work, this this BYOD work, right? I can't get you the laptops you need, right? Because China can't make them, because Taiwan can't ship enough chips because they're on lockdown, right? Like we literally got a little test of what could happen if there's ever funny business in that part of the world, right? Supply chains matter. And turns out we may not be able to get that computer to our new worker, but our new worker did have a computer, so what would it take to actually enable them? What would it take to make what they had compliant? How do you do that while giving them the comfort that you're not encroaching on their territory, right? Yeah, COVID, all these problems existed before, but COVID was just this big amplifier. And I think it made business leaders actually care. And a lot of you probably had conversations with your C-levels and your peers basically saying, how are we gonna handle this? We gotta keep the business moving. I need you to figure out a way of making these risks acceptable or coming up with new processes where the risk is acceptable. And so I think what came out of that was an acceptance of, you know what? The solution and the problem isn't get people in the office and I have a secure office and once they're on the inside, everything is good. It let us actually say, well, what is the core problem? What is the core business problem that I'm actually trying to enable? And it allowed us to actually say, you know what? I want people to be able to work. My identity system is really the root of that. And if I could build an access system that kind of combines security and identity, then I could actually start getting some deterministic results as opposed to probabilistic results, right? On the security side of things. Well, what does that mean? And why is he using math words? Well, number one, I like math. But and I can't help myself, but I'll put it a different way. A lot of you have security controls in place that do things like bad DNS name screening, new DNS name screening. Like one of the easiest things for a bad guy to do is light up a new name, get a cert for it through Let's Encrypt, and then start running his botnet through there, right? So it's like one of the easiest signals to look at is like, hey, you know what? If you just showed up, I'm probably not going to give you a bank account. Like you need some sort of history, right? Surprise, surprise. There's an analogy from another industry. So you've got that control. You've got some network screening controls, right? You probably don't want to let people access your environment if they're coming off of Tor exit nodes or these ad hoc networks. You don't want them to come out of known compromised infrastructure. You probably have email protection, right? That's looking for like links that might be suspicious. And so as these attacks hit you, you're kind of chopping them down. It's like wood chopping. It's like, all right, there's no, I got 10,000 attempts, but really only 100 went through, right? And then you've got a training program as your last resort, right? Like, please, please, please don't click the bad links. Well, what are the bad links? Well, we're not exactly sure. It's really hard, but just don't do it, right? And the average enterprise has a 4% click-through rate with training on bad links, right? 70% of what companies deal with, if you're the typical company, in your incident response is either credential theft, credential stuffing. Yeah, too much tea. It's like my mouth is now parched. Credential theft, credential stuffing, push bombing, man in the middle, man in the browser, access token theft, right? That's 70%. Well, what if the credential never moved? What if it wasn't a secret? What if it was a signature, right? If it's a signature, then you don't actually have to share a secret. If you don't share a secret, that secret never hits another device. Every device that secret hits expands this footprint you have to protect, right? Like the reason it's so hard to defend passwords is passwords fundamentally touch almost every system between you and the service. And by the way, you don't manage most of them, right? Amazon does, and Cloudflare does, and all these third parties, right? If your engineers are like ours, there's no third-party service that they don't want to add into the middle. Where are my engineers? They're back there. They know what I'm talking about. So if we use signatures over secrets, right? These things don't have to move. So now I have a small defensive area. If we use Nelson and Mike's idea of I've got a HSM in my pocket, then all of a sudden I can guarantee, and we're going to use that word a lot today, guarantee. So keep asking us what we mean by guarantee. Guarantee. It's our guarantee gimmick. We can guarantee that signing key doesn't move, right? And so if I guarantee that signing key doesn't move, how do you steal a credential, right? The only way I can come up with it, you physically have to steal the device, right? And that's a completely different statistical game than stealing passwords, right? And then there's a bunch of other things you can start to do there. So you have all of these probabilistic controls. It's just chopping down attempts, right? And by the way, the adversary now has tools that can fake anyone in the room, right? From a text perspective, from a video perspective, from a voice perspective, from a content generation perspective, that 4% click-through rate is going to go up, right? And the cost of that is low, and we've got more on that for you later to do it as well. So what if there's a deterministic way? I'm not going to chop. I'm just going to say everything from an authentication perspective has to use a credential that can't move. Everything has to use a credential with a provable guarantee that it can't move. Every authentication actually has to prove something about the device it's coming from. That's a different world. Imagine if 70% of that workload just wasn't in your operations center anymore. What could you actually work on? What could you move to? And this gets back to, like, in a modern system, you always want to know not just who someone is, not just what they're trying to do, but think about an airplane. When you get on an airplane, right? You show your driver's license, you smile, they spend like 8 seconds like looking really sternly of like, is this really you? But then they also check you, right? They're trying to answer, are you safe to allow onto the airplane? Are your bags safe to allow onto the airplane? Another industry, right, with very parallels sort of analogy of like how we can do things in cyber. A modern authentication system can do the exact same thing. It's not just who you are, it's not just what you're trying to do, but are you safe to allow the operation to proceed, right? And finally, and this is the other kind of interesting thing, in the early 2010s, the banks got together and said frauds for traditional credit, actually I think it was probably earlier than that, fraud from traditional credit card is just through the roof, right? Traditional credit cards are shared secrets, right? There's a code that you literally share, and you can scan the code, read it off, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, we actually can thank the finance industry and the banking industry, because through a pretty interesting story, but I don't actually now have the time to tell you, they introduced the first single device, multi-factor, passwordless authentication. And any of you that bought a cup of coffee this morning with Apple Pay or Google Pay used it, right? Your phone gets a bill. Your phone either takes the PIN or the biohash, staples it to the bill, and then signs it with a key that's locked in a little enclave in that phone that cannot leave and is bound to that, and you, right? What if your workforce getting to work? And what if your customers consuming your products could have an experience as simple and as secure as Apple Pay and Google Pay? So this is how do we think about the work that we do. Again, today is all about you telling us what's important to you, what your business goals are. This is a little bit of us telling you how we've been prioritizing things. We are a security company solving an identity problem. When you meet people around the room, when you meet people here, you're going to learn pretty quickly, like there's a very diverse background here. Like we have people here who have been working on security products for multiple decades. We have people here who have actually been protecting our nation from a critical infrastructure and warfighter and intelligence capability. We have people in the room who have actually done the offensive side of that. Like, we know security well. And we think identity is now time to actually be not just productivity, but productivity and security. So secure by design, Louis is going to give you a lot on that. But secure by design, it really means it starts with who we hire, how do we build, what do we build, and how do we operationalize you? And are we always thinking about that security side? Simple to admin. This is our second kind of core product value. And simple to admin, it's really trying to address these two themes that we see in almost all administrators. Number one, how do I know I'm not going to take my business down? Right? I want to make this change. How do I know it's not going to take my business down? If you've ever managed a firewall, you've felt this. If you've ever managed a router, you've felt this. If you've ever managed identity, you have stabbed yourself multiple times, right? So we've spent a lot of time and effort actually trying to build a system that's analyzable. Turns out, yes, there's a branch of math that you can actually use to do this sort of thing. Ask the policy team to explain some of that when you're actually taking the tours a little bit. But value number one, how do we make sure that we're not going to take people down? How do we build confidence with the administrator that their plan changes will not be disruptive? Problem two that we found in these administrators. I want to go home and see my family at 5. How do I know you're not going to just create weeks and weeks and weeks of work for me, right? And go to the demo for Secure SSO. We put a lot of energy into that, and it's actually really freaking cool. They told me not to swear as much today. Normally I say something else. And finally, easy to use. And this is really like, how do we make it as simple and secure for your workforce and customers to either consume your product or just get to work, as simple and as secure as they bought a cup of coffee. All right, so where are we going? This is going to go real quick because I don't have too much time left. But we started doing identity for people. But people aren't the only ones out there. Our future overlords, or at least their ancestors, are already swimming around in your data centers. They're already swimming around in your organization, and you want to track their identity, right? How do you know the automated workload that's using an API token is on the server that you expect and nothing else, right? Same property that we have for people should apply to your automated workloads. And we got to talk on that a little bit later for you today. When we say provable, we mean something explicitly. And I'm gonna beg you all to bear with me and go in your mind back to high school geometry when you were doing the proofs, right? Like, you could actually prove a thing. You can prove a lot in identity and authentication, and it doesn't have to get as complicated as some of those math proofs. Where was this signing key from? Who is the manufacturer of that key? Oh, I only have to believe that the production line of Infineon has not been compromised. If I believe that, then literally everything else is just a simple computation where you can have a side log and you can verify after the fact. Like, that is the sort of thing that we mean when we say provable. And look for that sort of work across the entire product, right? You're not going to encounter that every day, but the reason why you want that is, how do you know the software you wrote that's going to auto land my plane in 0-0 conditions is actually going to land it on the runway and not in a mountain, right? How do you test that? Like, how do you software test that? Well, you don't do it in 0-0 conditions, first of all, right? But you also have to start using math. You have to also start using and programming in a very specific way and using math tools that can kind of tell you what can and can't happen under certain conditions. And it kind of takes both. And we're starting to put that in the infrastructure of identity and access, right? This has already existed for a while, by the way, in the aerospace industry. Like, this is actually how they de-risk flight automation. And then finally, zero standing privilege. I feel like I'm just teasing because there's a talk on almost all of these a little bit later. But zero standing privilege is all about how do we not overprivilege, right? All of you have probably overprivileged your organization because it's just a hard problem, right? You hire people, you fire people, people move, you buy companies, you divest, you sell companies. Like, this is an ever-changing problem, right? And your administrative staff is probably not huge, right? You've probably been asking for more people on your administrative staff for a while, and you're just not going to get it, right? So how do we come up with a different way of understanding and thinking about privilege, understanding the privilege that exists in our environment as is, right? Because if we think back to, I don't want to disrupt the business, right? How do we just understand what exists before we then start taking steps to make change in a non-disruptive way and actually start hitting at that overprivilege problem? There's a demo at the far end of the building called Access 360 where you should ask those questions, as well as the policy team. So again, you're going to hear this word a lot, guarantees. We're running a whole marketing campaign behind it. There's meaning and substance behind this word. Ask for the examples on every demo you see, right? This is intentional, this is precise, and there is an exact meaning behind this in everything we do, right? We are a security company, we're solving an identity problem, right? We're solving the security problem of identity and access. We think that's the best place to solve it. We think it's the easiest place to solve it. We think it's the least work for the most return for everyone. And whether you use us or someone else, like, we believe the world is going to shift in that way pretty quick. So with that said, I'd like to launch into some of the detailed discussion. And kicking off that discussion is going to be Louis Maraccio. Louis heads our architecture. He interacts with customers. He's an engineer that will actually look you in the eyes, not just your shoes. And I've known him for a long time. He's actually pretty good at what he does. So let's hand it over.
Sir. Wow. Thank you very much, guys. As Jason said, my name is Louis Marascio. I'm in the office of the CTO here. I focus on product architecture. Now, I'm from Texas, okay? And they told me I couldn't talk about barbecue and I couldn't have any slides about brisket, but I'm gonna talk about brisket just for a quick second. Because it is relevant. So listen, if you've ever had good Texas barbecue, good brisket, you know that could be a religious experience, right? And people think it's complicated. And it is complicated in its own way, but it's really you've just got to do all the little things right? You've got to get the right meat. You've got to trim it the right way. You got to season it simply and deliberately, right? You got to get a nice clean fire. You got to manage those temperatures, cook it just long enough, take it off, and then let it chill out. Let it rest. It's got to rest for at least 6 hours. If you do all of that stuff, if you do all the little things right, you can produce something amazing, right? Now, this analogy can be used for lots of things in life, but I use it for secure by design. Because secure by design, which is one of the fundamental pillars, of the business, and I won't say the most important one, because if you have, one weak pillar, they all comes tumbling down. But when we look at the security foundation of the business, it's very important. It is the pillar, right? And it starts with, first of all, let me differentiate real quick. Secure by design is a term, CISA, Secure by Design Pledge, the Technical Exchange Group, we do all of that stuff. Table stakes, we mean a whole lot more, right? Starts with who we are as a company. Who do we hire? The experience we look for, the skill sets we look for, the attitude we look for, and the potential we look for, and the people that we bring in, right? We have in the office of the CTO, the creator of the TPM from Intel, right? In the office of the CTO, we've got the creator of the Microsoft Sandbox, right? We look for the people who have the security mindset, but more importantly, they have the ability to make everybody around them better, right? So who do we hire? Who do we bring in to embed that ethos into our company, right? Because it needs to be and is everybody's job, right? You take, for example, our head of design, Alan, and you pair him up with Crispin, who created the Microsoft Sandbox, and then all of a sudden, Alan is taking security training. It's an amazing thing, right? He loves it because it has to go in everywhere to everything that we do. Beyond that, how do we build our product, right? The technologies we choose, the languages we choose, the fact that we use Rust, it's memory safe, all of that goes into what we do, right? And when we say how do we build, it's also how do we design? How do we analyze the security of it? All of that. It's very important. When we look at our architecture, right? Immutable architecture, zero phishable factors, device credentials, using the hardware, using the enclave and the TPM to store those keys, fundamental. And finally, what does all this, mean to you, right? Ultimately, our job and what we're trying to do is dramatically change the threat landscape. Fundamentally shift the threats that you have to be concerned about, right? And we can do that with the architecture of our product, right? Public key crypto, private keys stored in the enclave, right? Platform authenticator, wrapped with device trust and rich data ecosystem around it that brings all of that information in so you can write company-specific policy that makes sense to your business so that at point of authentication, you don't have to worry about those threats. They're gone. It's fundamentally different, the approach, right? It is fundamentally different. There are no shared secrets. We leverage the hardware to ensure that those keys cannot move. If you can trust that that device came out of the fab without being tampered with, and unless we have anybody in here who's from the CIA or the NSA, you probably raise your hand. No, right? You can trust. If you can trust that, you're good to go, right? And then fundamentally, you have to include the device. You have to include the attribute. At point of authentication, it's not good enough to have a one-day check. It's not good enough. Moment of authentication, information from the device and information from your security architecture, your security ecosystem. So let's look, we're going to look real quick at a couple of things that we've done and a couple of places we're going. And we'll set up, you can ask questions when you walk around the demos and talk to folks. But obviously, hardware bound is fundamental to what we do, right? The pass keys are bound to the device. They cannot move. Now, that hardware is super powerful, right? So we delivered registered biometric, which is a wonderful feature, right? If someone somehow gets a hold of one of your employees' devices and enrolls a biometric, you can enable policy so that that biometric, just because it's biometric, won't be permitted to authenticate, right? Only the biometric at point of enrollment would be allowed, for example. That's delivered, you can make use of it today. But how do we go deeper with the hardware? So we're looking at and actively working on integrating the supply chain into this. So that, for example, using the attestation infrastructure that Apple has available for their hardware, using the platform certificates that you can purchase from companies like HP or Dell when you purchase the hardware, to attest to, right, an approvable way that the hardware that you send to an employee when they enroll is the actual hardware that you sent to them. It's not something that's been tampered with en route, right? And when you start to do this and you start to build that provable chain, you realize that you can then make that green circle earlier, it can become wider and wider, right? We eliminate classes of threats for you. No shared secrets with phishing resistant MFA. The new SSO product has no dependency on shared secrets whatsoever. And as we look forward, how do we include device-bound session tokens so that if you have an unprivileged endpoint compromise, they can't take that token and then move laterally and use it elsewhere, right? It's device-bound, right? You'll see that showing up in our SSO product in the future. Then we add in our device trust. Device 360 was launched. It allows you to build wonderful, rich, custom attributes that you can then pull information from those devices and include it in policy. And then when we look forward, we're going to enable you to allow, if you choose with policy, to allow your employees to self-remediate for certain classes of non-compliance, right? So that we want to reduce the burden, right, on your employees. So that, for example, if something's happened on their device and they can bring it into compliance and you want to allow them to do so based on policy, they'll be allowed to do that. And we'll prompt them and give them the tips to do so. And then finally, our integration ecosystem allows you to leverage, right, your security architecture, all of that rich data that you have rolling around out there, and pull it in today. You can bring that data in today to the integrations, the named integrations that we have, and in the future, we're going to make it super easy for you to include data from any public REST accessible API, right? And you can imagine that there's all kinds of bespoke systems that you might be able to draw a security signal from when you think about your company. All of this boils down to the foundational pillar that allows us to deliver the security guarantees that we're making to our customers, right? The security guarantees that we believe we can uniquely make to our customers. So with that, I'm going to invite Sarah up so that she can talk about simple to administer. Sorry I didn't give you a cool introduction.
Thanks, Lewis. So I'm here to talk about easy to admin. I guess we called it simple to admin on this slide. So I started off my career as my identity career as an IAM admin. I am not a security nerd. I am an identity nerd. We have both here at the company. And being an IAM admin is a hard job. So IAM is broad. I'm guessing that most of you did not know all of the words that Louis just said when he described our products, but it's also deep. So if you just look at MFA, for example, that is a field that goes very deep into FIDO and U2F and all sorts of standards. And so it's a really hard thing to build for. And when we think about satisfying our IAM admins, we think about a hierarchy of needs, similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the first being secure defaults, the second being ability to grow, and the third being the ability to quantify impact. So safe defaults mean that a lot of identity admins are thrown in the chair. They do not know what they're doing. They are smart people, and someone told them, it is now your job to administrate the identity system. What do? Well, if they have Beyond Identity, we imagine a world where they can put the console into beginner mode. And what beginner mode means is that their actions are limited. There's very little they can do to compromise the security of the environment itself and compromise the risk profile of the company. As they get more comfortable, they can experiment in sandboxes. They can watch tutorials. They can learn about different aspects of identity and grow their knowledge. And as they grow, they will sure enough become identity nerds like the people in this room. And identity nerds are all, as we know, control freaks. And we want the ability to be able to customize everything, to be able to write customized policies, to be able to have really fine-grained role definitions and branding options, and all those sorts of things. So we want the console to grow with you as you grow in your knowledge as an identity administrator. And then one of the little appreciated parts of being an identity admin is that you have to constantly fight for your team and fight for funding. And when you go to your executive and say, hey, we need more people on the identity team, the executive thinks, well, I log in every morning and I don't even notice it. It takes half a second. Like, we don't need to fund that. That works great. Right? And so this is where design comes in. So as Louis mentioned, we've hired Alan Kowalski. There you go. And he spent years at Apple doing design and teaching, and he has a whole team here at Beyond Identity who is working on these dashboards, working on these ways to quantify impact so that you can, as an identity administrator, show your executives, show your board things that they can easily see, easily understand. You don't have to go and find this data. You don't have to put it into a PowerPoint and make it pretty. We will do all of that for you so that you can justify all of the impact that you are making on your company. And with that, I will bring up Jing.
I have two things in my hands. All right. Hi, welcome. I am so excited to talk to all of you about the third core pillar of Beyond Identity, which is, drumroll please, easy to use. So because Louis talked about briskets, I love briskets too, but don't let him fool you. He talks about briskets as easy. If you've tried it, it is not easy. I got this giant smoker last year in my tiny Brooklyn yard, and I tried smoking a 10-pound brisket as my first smoke. And oh my God, that 10-pound piece of meat was the most finicky thing ever. I still got a smoke ring though, but it was a little dry. I'm working on it. But my point is, if you think something is easy, you might want to think again, because sometimes the easiest thing can be very complicated and nuanced. So when we think about authentication as an organization, we also try to bring a nuanced thinking into it. So another fun fact, aside from the fact that I like briskets, which is universal, I hope. So I have 2 degrees in philosophy, and then I realized, wow, cybersecurity is kind of more interesting. But what I've constructed here is a simple logical argument with 3 premises and a conclusion that we must arrive at if we were to accept the validity of these premises. So you can yell at me if you disagree with any of the premises, of course. My first premise is that security is human. Yes, we protect applications, we protect resources, we protect our networks, but at the end of the day, what we're protecting are the human beings who work for us that produce things of intellectual value. And in doing so, we protect their livelihoods. So You can't think about security as something that's just technical. It's not. It's about the human beings. The second fact, or the second premise, is human beings will take the path of least resistance. If you think about the college courtyard, classic example, they have this path that goes straight and then to the left. And then, of course, there's a footpath cutting across the grass, much to the chagrin of the gardener, I'm sure. But that's because if there's a simple way to get from A to B, human beings will take the simpler path. So my last premise is human beings were not born to authenticate. This one might be controversial. I know, we love authentication here at Beyond Identity, but for most people, it is the least interesting parts of their day. And it's okay, we're born to do bigger things, like change the world, you know? That kind of stuff. So, if we accept them, what must we conclude? Well, we must conclude that the easiest option has to be the safest. And the way that Beyond Identity delivers that is by decreasing friction within authentication to as close to zero as humanly possible. So our authentication is single device, it's passwordless by default, and as you'll see if you visit the Universal MFA demo station, we're working on decreasing clicks on mobile, and what you're seeing on the screen is something. I'm still working on the name. I'm notoriously bad at naming, which is great for a product marketer. But essentially, we give you a way through our SSO that allows users to do an IDP-initiated application launch without even opening a browser. So this is a way in which we manifest the easiest option being the safest, right? Secondly, we cannot rely on human judgment. Human beings are not robots. I cannot tell a hex code apart from another. A legitimate website is very, very difficult to discern. So what if we can unburden the human being and put the burden of authentication on machines? At the core of Beyond Identity is this cool little thing called a platform authenticator. It is, I like to call it as a special agent, right? It's not an endpoint agent, it's an authenticator, and it does so much more than that. And as an authenticator, what it can do is it can verify the origin request, make sure that it's from a domain that you recognize and authorize. It can sign certificates, sign challenges, execute device security compliance, and all of this cool stuff. So why have a human being do that when you can have a literal machine to do it? Put the machines to work. And lastly, where you don't have MFA is your weakest spot in your organization. So when you think about frictionless MFA, you have to have universal coverage. We really tried. And believe me, this is tough because all the operating systems have different cryptographic interactions that we have to consider. But we support Windows, etc. And we've been doing improvements on Linux as well as launching support for Chrome OS this quarter. If you want to check out all of our endpoint authentication, check out the Universal MFA demo station. So, I'm going to leave you with this. Oh, it's back. All right, here we go. I'm going to leave you with this. The one thing that human beings are good at is we can recognize faces. We recognize smiles and energy, and typically that works really well for us in our daily life. However, the robots have taken this away from us. And what's happening now is you're having AI deepfake fraud that is being disseminated at scale. So we also wanted to give you a way to kind of defend not just against your present threats, but your future threats. So I think there's a video coming up next, and I'm gonna get off on stage. Thank you so much for being here. I wanna talk to as many of you as humanly possible and enjoy BeyondCon.
Hey, good morning. How can I help?
Hi, Ethan. Thanks so much for joining on such a short notice. We're bringing in a consultant to help us with expansion in Asia. We need to wire $500,000 to the consultancy today, and I brought in Jeremy, who is leading the project, to confirm the details.
Hey, Ethan. Yeah, we need this done today.
Got it. Can you send me the payment destination details?
Yes. I'm sending those through.
You should have them now.
Great. I'll go ahead and make the transfer.
Perfect.
Thanks again, Ethan.
Happy to help. Hey, good morning. How can I help?
Hi, Ethan. Thank you so much for joining on such a short notice.
We're bringing on a consultant to help us with expansions in Asia. We need to wire $500,000 to the consultancy today, and I brought in Jeremy.
Who's leading the project to confirm the details.
Hey, Ethan. Yeah, we need this done today.
Got it. Let me just authenticate really quick.
Perfect. Can you both verify if your reality check first?
And then I'll go ahead and grab the payment details.